right, let's look at the interaction effect. And I'm hoping that this is going to be a review for the most part, because we did learn about interaction effects in the lab. But of course, that was a little while ago, and so you might have forgotten. So it's good that we are going over this again. Let's start with a definition. And if the effect of one factor is different for each level of the other factor, an interaction effect is present. All right. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's significant. You have to look at your ANOVA output, look at the F value for the interaction, and more specifically, you look to see if that F value is significant. So if the sig value for your F is less than 0.05 or 0.01 if you want to be conservative, then you can say the interaction effect is in fact significant. And at that point, we got to try and figure out, well, okay, what does this mean? How are we going to interpret that? So we're going to do that now looking at this graph. One way that we can interpret this interaction effect is to compare left and right hemispheric dominant people on creativity scores, but we'll do it separately for the 0 joint group, the 1 joint group, and the 2 joint group. Okay, so again, we're going to compare left versus right. Okay, hemispheric dominance. We're going to ask, is there a difference? Is there an effect of hemispheric dominance? And is that effect the same regardless of which level of marijuana you look at? Or is the effect of hemispheric dominance, right versus left, changing depending on which level of marijuana you look at? If it's changing, then we can see where our interaction effect is happening. All right, so left is green, blue is right. So let's compare left to right for the 0 joint group. And we see that left hemispheric dominant people scored higher on creativity compared to right hemispheric people. So there is an effect here of hemispheric dominance. And the effects is just looking at the difference between the means. It's about, maybe 15, somewhere between 15 and 20 points, right? About that. 70 to 90 would be 20, 15, 20 points. Now we're going to look at the 1 joint group. Is there an effect of hemispheric dominance? In other words, is left different from right? And the answer is yes. And now we have to look and see, well, is it by about the same amount? So again, the difference, this was, let's say, about 80, and this is about 60, maybe 65. So again, we're looking at about a 15 to 20 point difference. Now, if we were to stop here, then we would conclude that there's no interaction. Why? Because the effect that hemispheric dominance is having here at the 0 joint level is about the same as the effect that it's having here at the 1 joint level. In other words, the effect of hemispheric dominance doesn't depend on whether you look at 0 joints or 1 joint. It's about the same. Now let's look at what's going on for the 2 joint group. Now we do see something different that we didn't see here or here. When you get to 2 joints, the difference between left and right pretty much disappears. So we say there's been a pattern change, right? From here to here, 0 to 1, the pattern was roughly the same. About a 15 to 20 point increase favoring the left group, about a 15 to 20 point increase, again, favoring the left group. So there's no pattern change. But when we get here, there is a pattern change. So if our interaction was significant in the ANOVA, if that F value was significant, we would basically say that to explain the nature of the interaction, we looked at the effect of hemispheric dominance separately for each level of marijuana and found that for both the 0 and 1 joint conditions, left hemispheric dominant people were more creative than right by about 15 to 20 points. However, by the time we got, when we look at the 2-joint group, that difference between left and right disappeared. And there was essentially no difference between the two groups. So now people would be able to understand our interaction effect. All right. So that's kind of summarized here. Left hemispheric dominant people were more creative than right when they were when they consumed either 0 or 1 joint. However, left equals right hemispheric dominance when 2 joints were given. So when they were in the 2-joint group. All right. So the blue-green pattern, in this case, the left versus right blue-green pattern, left versus right hemispheric dominance, is different for the 2-joint group relative to these other conditions. All right. So that tells us that we have an interaction. If we saw, let's pretend that this blue group was different, was lower. Okay, so the right group, let's say it was lower, and again, the point difference between green and blue was about 15 to 20 points, then again, we're saying, yeah, things are happening. There is a difference between what we're seeing here, here, and here, because this one is so much lower. But the trick is saying, is the pattern different? So again, imagine this blue group is down here. What's the pattern? Green is higher than blue by about 15 to 20 points. Green is higher than blue than about 15 to 20 points. Green is higher than blue by about 15 to 20 points. If that were true, there would be no interaction. Now remember from the lab that there is another way of looking at an interaction effect. Here we were asking what effect is hemispheric dominance having separately for each level of marijuana, but we could change that around and say, well, what effect is marijuana having separately for each level of hemispheric dominance? So let's look at that. All right. So this is just another way of expressing or defining an interaction effect. All right. This is saying basically the same thing as the previous definition. It's just giving more explanation. All right. So before we look and see what effect marijuana is having for left versus right hemispheric dominant people, let's just revisit a definition of an interaction effect, okay, or how you would detect it. So you look at the pattern for the effect of one factor on the DV, but you look only within a level, one particular level of the other factor, okay? So you're going to look at the effect of hemispheric dominance, but only within one level of hemispheric dominance. So we'll start with the left. Then once you've established what's going on there, once you've got a sense of what that pattern looks at, you compare this pattern with the pattern for the other level. Okay, so you're going to look at the effect of the effect of marijuana, this time on right, and see if the pattern changes from what you saw for the left. All right. So if the pattern changes, we have an interaction effect, and if it doesn't, well, then we don't. So let's look first at the green bars. Okay, so we're going to look at this bar, and this bar. Now, what are we comparing? Well, these are all left people. This is left, left, and left. So what we're comparing are 0 joints, 1 joint, and 2 joints, but only for the left people. Now, what can we say? A little bit of a drop here from 0 to 1, right? A little bit of a drop, and a pretty significant drop, all right, at 2 joints. So we have a tiny drop, a big drop. That's what's happening for the left, okay? Now let's look at the blue bars and see if the pattern is any different. So we have a bit of a drop, and I would say a moderate drop, right? So if we let's leave out this group for a second. Let's just look green to green. Okay, that was a little bit of a drop, and from blue to blue, a little bit of a drop. So the pattern we see with the green is about the same as the pattern we see with the blue. Okay, so if we stop there and we just had these two levels, I would say, yeah, no, there's no interaction there because the extent of the difference here is about the same as the extent of the difference here. All right. Sorry, I pointed to the wrong bars. The extent of the difference here between the two greens is about the same as the extent of the difference between the two blues. Sorry about that. Now we have to say, okay, what about what's going on in this last condition? So again, we have from here to here, that's a pretty dramatic drop, right? We go from what, about 85 to what, about 50? So that's a 35-point drop. Now the question is this drop from blue to blue, is it also about 35 points? And so, whoa, sorry about that. Let me go back. This blue bar here is about at, what did I say, 65? And this one is at about, what, 50? So that's only about a 15-point drop. So from here to here, we said it was about 35. Here to here, it's about only 15, maybe 20. So there is a pattern change. All right. So again, green to green to green. What do we have? Small drop, huge drop. Blue to blue to blue. Is it the same? Starts off the same, right? So from here to here, small drop. But from here to here, it's decent, but it's nowhere as large as from this green to this green. So that tells us that the pattern is different, and therefore there's a interaction. Okay? So you look at the pattern for the green bars and identify it. Then look at the pattern for the blue bars. Identify that pattern. What we discovered is that the pattern is different. The differences are larger between the green bars than between the blue bars. All right, and so that means that we can now explain the interaction effect. All right, so again, assuming that your ANOVA was significant, the F for the interaction was significant, just looking at the graph, we can say for left hemispheric individuals, there really wasn't much of a difference in creativity between 0 and 1 joint. But in the 2 joint group, there was a very sharp decline in creativity, all right, compared to these other 2, especially compared to 1, there was that very sharp decrease. However, for the right hemispheric group, again, not a big difference, just a slight drop from 0 to 1 joint, but when smoking 2 joints, there is also a decrease, but the effect of the 2 joints on the right people was not as dramatic as what we saw for the left group. Okay? So that would be how we would interpret that effect.